Morgan Dietz doesn't have an alibi. He was having an affair, staring down the barrel of a scandal. He's our horseman, Commander.
Not necessarily, Colonel.
Television has a short memory. A show runs for a decade, builds millions of loyal fans, shapes careers, influences entire genres, and then the moment it leaves the air, the culture moves on like it never existed. We do this constantly. We celebrate the same 5 shows from the 90s on repeat while completely ignoring 10 others that were just as big, just as good, and in some cases, far more important to how television actually developed. Today, I'm building the defense. 10 90s shows that history forgot, and I'm going to make the case, one by one, for why each of them deserved so much better than the silence they got. You tell me in the comments whether I've convinced you. Let's go. Number 1, Jag.
Look, you're missing the point, Sturgis.
Come on, Mac.
I've never slept with him.
Is that the problem?
There is no problem.
I'm starting here because this is arguably the most absurd case of historical amnesia on this entire list. Jag ran for 10 seasons. 10. NBC aired it first, canceled it after 1 season, which is already a terrible decision. And then CBS picked it up and ran it for 9 more years, all the way to 2005. 257 total episodes. Friday nights on CBS, steady ratings, loyal audience, decade-long run. By any reasonable measurement, this show was a success. So here's my case for why Jag deserves to be remembered as something far more than a footnote. In 2003, Jag aired a 2-part episode. Just another episode, right? Wrong. That 2-part episode was a backdoor pilot for a little show called NCIS. NCIS went on to become the most watched drama on American television for years. It spawned multiple spin-offs. The NCIS franchise has run for over 20 seasons and generated billions in revenue. It completely defined CBS's primetime identity for 2 straight decades. Here's what that means. Jag is not just a forgotten show. Jag is the parent of the single most successful drama franchise of the 21st century. Every NCIS episode ever made, every spin-off, every ratings record, every $1 billion in revenue, all of it traces directly back to a show that the television conversation treats like it barely existed. The critics ignored it because it wasn't flashy. No viral moments, no memeable catchphrases, no prestige TV credentials. It was a military legal procedural that was competent, serious, and exactly what it said it was. And that's precisely why it deserves more respect, not less. It earned its audience honestly, held them for a decade, and then handed television one of its greatest franchises on the way out. You don't forget a show that did that. You owe it a proper place in the conversation. Number 2, Touched by an Angel.
Excuse me, mister. I found this $10 on the floor, and I think it might be yours.
Oh, thanks, kid.
Let me ask you something. When was the last time you heard someone mention Touched by an Angel in a serious conversation about 90s television? Probably never. And that is a genuinely strange thing when you look at the actual numbers. At its peak, this show was pulling in tens of millions of viewers per episode. Multiple consecutive seasons ranked among the most watched programs on all of American television. CBS ran it for 9 full seasons and 201 episodes from 1994 to 2003. It had a proper series finale. It was by every measurable standard a massive, sustained hit. The reason it gets dismissed is simple. Critics never liked it. The show was sincere. It was openly spiritual. It was about 3 angels traveling across America helping people through their darkest moments, and it was completely uninterested in irony, moral ambiguity, or the kind of darkness that critics were increasingly deciding was what made television serious. So the critical establishment wrote it off, and somewhere along the way, the pop culture conversation followed. But here's my argument. The audience that loved Touched by an Angel, tens of millions of them, week after week for 9 years, did not disappear when the show ended. They just had nowhere to go on mainstream television anymore. And eventually they migrated to Hallmark Channel, to faith-based films, to inspirational cable programming. That entire ecosystem, which quietly generates enormous audiences and revenue to this day, exists in large part because Touched by an Angel proved there was a massive, loyal, completely underserved market for this kind of storytelling. The critics were wrong to dismiss it. A show that genuinely moved tens of millions of people every week for nearly a decade, that identified and served an audience that mainstream television had decided didn't matter, and that laid the groundwork for an entire content ecosystem. That show deserves to be in the conversation. The fact that it isn't tells you more about critical bias than it does about the quality of the show. Number 3, The Drew Carey Show.
I hate to say anything bad about anyone, but the driver in my carpool is on drugs.
This is the one that genuinely makes me angry, because the reason this show disappeared has nothing to do with quality or audience interest. It got erased by a paperwork problem. 9 seasons, 233 episodes. ABC ran it from 1995 to 2004. Working-class surrealist sitcom set in Cleveland with elaborate musical numbers, constantly changing opening credits, fourth wall breaks, and live episodes. It was weird and ambitious and different in ways that almost nothing else on network television at the time was attempting, and it found a real audience for all of that. Now here is the case I want to make. Shows like 30 Rock and Community are celebrated as pioneers of meta-comedy, experimental sitcom structure, and fourth wall awareness. Those shows are genuinely great, but The Drew Carey Show was doing all of those things years earlier on a major network with a working-class aesthetic that neither of those shows ever touched. The musical sequences alone were more ambitious than most of what network television was producing in that era. So why doesn't anyone remember it? Because of music rights. The show used popular licensed songs extensively, for opening themes, for elaborate musical numbers throughout episodes, and clearing all of that music for home video and streaming turned out to be so expensive that for years the show essentially vanished from any official platform. New generations never discovered it because there was nowhere easy to find it. It missed the entire first wave of 90s nostalgia revival because it was locked behind a licensing problem. That is not a verdict on the show. That is a verdict on the business side of television. The Drew Carey Show earned its place in the conversation about innovative 90s sitcoms. It just got administratively erased before that conversation could happen. Number 4, Becker.
Doesn't mean I'm not right. You know something?
Here is the case for Becker, and it starts with a question. If House MD is considered a landmark television character, why is Dr. John Becker not even part of the conversation? Ted Danson played Becker, a burned-out, deeply cynical doctor running a struggling clinic in the Bronx who openly disliked most of the people he was helping. He was brilliant, exhausting, and endlessly watchable. This was Ted Danson, who everyone knew as the warm and lovable Sam Malone from Cheers, playing the complete opposite of that. The contrast alone was compelling television. CBS ran it for 6 seasons and 129 episodes. During its prime years, it sat comfortably in the upper tier of CBS's comedy lineup, performing especially well in the Monday night block alongside Everybody Loves Raymond. 6 seasons is not a lucky accident. 6 seasons means millions of people were choosing to spend their evenings with this character week after week. My argument is this. Becker invented a character type that television later gave enormous critical credit to other shows for perfecting. The cynical, brilliant, misanthropic doctor who uses competence as armor against genuine connection. That is House MD. That is a character who won Emmys and generated years of prestige television coverage. Becker was doing the same thing earlier on CBS with Ted Danson, and doing it well enough to run for 6 years. The show also proved something important about Danson himself. After Cheers ended, there were real questions about whether he could anchor another long-running series. Becker answered those questions with 6 years of consistent performance, and that track record is part of what made his later reinvention in shows like The Good Place possible. You don't forget a show that did all of that. Number 5, Spin City.
We're already 40 minutes late for work, and that woman you brought home is still in the shower.
She was very dirty.
The case for Spin City is also a case against a very specific kind of television nostalgia that tends to forget shows the moment their star changes. Michael J. Fox played Mike Flaherty, the deputy mayor of New York City, managing a chaotic staff and keeping a well-meaning but incompetent mayor out of trouble. It was fast, sharp, politically smart, and one of ABC's strongest comedy performers of the late 90s. Fox won multiple Golden Globes for it. He won an Emmy. Critics respected it. Audiences showed up consistently. Then in 2000, Fox announced he was leaving due to Parkinson's disease. Charlie Sheen stepped in. The show ran 2 more seasons and ended in 2002. And because the transition happened, because there's an obvious before and after break in the show's identity, the whole thing tends to get remembered, when it's remembered at all, as a sad story about a great show that lost its star rather than as a genuinely successful 6-season run. But here is what Spin City actually was beyond Michael J. Fox. It was a creative incubator that built some of television's most important careers. Bill Lawrence co-created it, the same Bill Lawrence who created Scrubs, Cougar Town, and co-created Ted Lasso. Connie Britton had early significant visibility on the show before becoming one of the most respected actresses on television in Friday Night Lights in Nashville. Gary David Goldberg, who created Family Ties, also created this. A show with that creative lineage that ran for 6 seasons, that starred one of the most beloved actors in television history at his peak. That show deserves to be remembered as a success, not just as a footnote to a sad story about illness. Number 6, Mad About You.
They're shipping us out tonight. I can't tell you where I'm going. It doesn't really matter anyway, because all I can think about is what I'm leaving behind.
This is the one that is hardest to explain. Mad About You was not just popular, it was prestigious. It won awards constantly. It featured one of the greatest sustained performances in sitcom history, and it is almost completely absent from serious 90s television conversations today. Helen Hunt won 4 consecutive Emmy Awards for Outstanding Lead Actress in a Comedy Series. 4 in a row. From 1996 to 1999. That is one of the most remarkable sustained achievements in the history of the awards. The show itself collected around a dozen primetime Emmys. Both Paul Reiser and Helen Hunt were reportedly earning close to $1 million per episode in the final season, the same salary tier as the Friends cast. This was a flagship NBC adult comedy sitting near the top of the Nielsen charts, critically acclaimed, awards decorated, and genuinely beloved by its audience for 7 seasons and 164 episodes. So here is my case. Mad About You belongs in the same breath as Seinfeld and Friends when people talk about what NBC comedy was in the 90s. Not because it was as culturally dominant, it wasn't, but because it was doing something those shows weren't doing. It was telling intimate, emotionally real stories about marriage with genuine cinematic ambition. It shot an entire episode in one continuous take. It was subtle and structurally daring in ways that sitcoms almost never attempted. The shows that later got celebrated for being different kinds of sitcoms owe something to Mad About You. That debt should come with acknowledgement. The fact that it doesn't is a gap in how we talk about this era of television. Number 7, Dharma and Greg.
Did you steal this? Shame on you!
Dharma.
You cannot understand Chuck Lorre, one of the most commercially successful television creators of the last 30 years, without understanding Dharma and Greg. And yet this show almost never comes up. A free-spirited yoga instructor marries a straight-laced lawyer on their first date. ABC 1997. Exploded immediately into the top 25. Jenna Elfman won a Golden Globe for Best Actress in 1999. 8 Golden Globe nominations and 6 Emmy nominations across the full run. Strong Wednesday night ratings for multiple seasons. Created by Chuck Lorre before 2.5 Men, before The Big Bang Theory, before Mom, before any of the properties that made him a television institution. Here is the argument. The formula that Lorre spent the next 20 years refining into a multi-billion-dollar television empire, clashing personalities, cultural opposites forced into proximity, broad, accessible humor built around stereotypes colliding, he proved that formula worked right here. Dharma and Greg was the laboratory. Everything that came after was a refinement of what this show demonstrated was possible. ABC eventually canceled it in 2002 after the time slot maneuvering left it exposed to Frasier in direct competition, and the ratings softened. It ended without a proper finale. And yes, the central premise ran thin after years of playing the same hippie versus yuppie tension, but none of that changes what the show accomplished or what it proved. You want to understand modern network comedy and where it came from, you have to reckon with Dharma and Greg. Number 8, Just Shoot Me.
Bill, hi, it's Maya Gallo. Do you really want to start tonight's news off with a story on strippers?
The standard story about Just Shoot Me is that it was a time slot beneficiary, a show that succeeded because it aired near Friends in ER on NBC Thursday nights rather than because of its own merits. I want to push back on that. Yes, the Thursday night must-see TV block helped. Of course it did. Everything that aired in that block benefited from the audience already assembled by two of the most watched shows in television history. But here is what that argument ignores. A bad show in a good time slot still fails. Audiences do not automatically stay tuned through a half hour of television they are not enjoying. Just Shoot Me held its audience for 7 seasons and over 140 episodes. That is not an accident of scheduling. That is a show doing its job. David Spade was genuinely funny. The ensemble chemistry was real. The writing was sharper than the show ever gets credit for. Stephen Levitan created it, and Levitan is the co-creator of Modern Family, one of the most decorated comedies of the 2000s. That creative sensibility was present in Just Shoot Me from the beginning. 6 Emmy nominations, 7 Golden Globe nominations, including Best Comedy Series. A workplace comedy set in the fashion world that helped build the template for the glossy, anxiety-filled fashion workplace stories that later became a recognizable genre in Ugly Betty and The Devil Wears Prada. This show contributed something real to the television landscape. It deserves to be remembered for what it actually was, not dismissed as a coattail rider. Number 9, Wings.
We had a pool going about what happened to you. I had $50 on drove cab off pier. So where you been all week?
Got arrested.
Wings gets described as a solid, enjoyable, reliable show that lived in the shadow of bigger programs. And I understand why, but I think that framing sells it short in a specific way that deserves to be challenged. 2 brothers running a small commuter airline on Nantucket Island. NBC, 1990 to 1997. 8 seasons, 172 episodes, 1 primary set, a tight core cast, no special effects, no gimmicks, just character-driven writing and an ensemble with genuine chemistry. At its peak, it sat among the more watched shows on television for multiple consecutive seasons, airing after Cheers for a significant stretch of its run. Here is my case. Wings did something that very few network sitcoms manage. It ran for 8 seasons without significantly declining in quality. That is hard. Most shows that run that long have obvious rough patches. Seasons where the writing is clearly treading water, where the cast looks bored, where the premise is being stretched to its limit. Wings stayed consistent. The same quality of character work, the same ensemble warmth, the same reliable writing for nearly a decade. And then there is the career argument. Tony Shalhoub built his profile on this show. Thomas Hayden Church spent years on Wings developing before his Oscar-nominated performance in Sideways. Those are 2 significant acting careers that Wings helped build and sustain. A show that never won a primetime Emmy but launched 2 major careers and maintained consistent quality across 8 seasons earned something better than the vague, solid, but forgettable label it usually gets number 10. Coach.
Coach here.
Hi.
Hey, how you doing?
Great. I'm still at the station.
How does it look today?
The game? No problem. Shoe and victory.
The last case I want to make is the most straightforward, and in some ways the most important, because it's about whose stories television decides are worth telling. Coach ran on ABC for 9 seasons and close to 200 episodes. Craig T. Nelson played Hayden Fox, a grumpy college football coach in Minnesota, managing his team, his family, and his relationship, and doing it for a specific audience, middle American, non-coastal viewers who love football and family-friendly humor, and were not particularly well served by the entertainment press. Craig T. Nelson won an Emmy in 1992 for Outstanding Lead Actor in a Comedy Series. The show went head-to-head with Seinfeld and Home Improvement at its peak and held its own. The reason Coach gets ignored in the nostalgia conversation is the same reason it got ignored by critics while it was airing. It was not aimed at the people doing the remembering. Television writers, critics, and the pop culture industry tend to be concentrated in coastal cities, and Coach was explicitly, unapologetically made for the rest of the country. That audience showed up for 9 seasons. The show demonstrated that you could build a massive and loyal viewership around exactly those archetypes without any critical support whatsoever. And the influence is real. Coach helped pave the way for shows like Last Man Standing that found enormous audiences by speaking directly to viewers that prestige television mostly ignores. That is not a small legacy. That is evidence that a show understood something about its audience that the critical conversation still has trouble fully accepting. 9 seasons. Craig T. Nielsen with an Emmy. Millions of loyal viewers. Coach earned its place in the 90s television conversation. It just never got one. 10 shows, 10 cases, and I think the evidence is pretty clear. Television's memory is selective in ways that have more to do with which audiences and critics got to write the history than with which shows actually mattered. Jag built NCIS. Touched by an Angel built an entire content ecosystem. Dharma and Greg built Chuck Lorre's empire. The Drew Carey Show pioneered a comedy format it never got credit for. Mad About You won a dozen Emmys and then disappeared from the conversation. Coach served an audience of millions that television still struggles to take seriously. These shows mattered. The people who loved them were real. The careers they built were real. The influence they had was real. So I want to know, which of these cases did I make that you actually agree with? And which shows do you think I missed? Drop it in the comments. This is a conversation worth having properly. And if this kind of argument is what you're looking for, subscribe, because there's a lot more television history worth defending.